Today I have Steve Schwartz, who is the podcast creator and content creator for LSAT Unplugged. He reached out to me a couple of days ago in regards to the LSAT because he saw that I was working on my studying and he wanted to do a collaborate, and I looked at his page and I saw some excellent tips on his page. So we're going to do a collaborate today to discuss the LSAT and just go over some general questions that I may have and something that you guys may have as well. Hi, Steve. How are you?
Hey, Kels, it's great to be connecting with you today. Thanks for doing this.
Yes, sir. I'm really excited about this video, and I have so many questions, but I'm going to try not to be a nerd.
No, we want that. Being a nerd's great. That's what this is all about, right?
I'm truly a nerd at heart. So my story with the LSAT, to give you a little backstory on me, I'm not sure if you've seen my previous videos on my channel, but I basically started my LSAT journey about a year, maybe a year and a half ago. I graduated from undergrad in 2014 with a bachelor's degree in public relations, and then I went on to receive my master's in criminal justice at Boston U. It was always a dream of mine to go to law school, but we had a pre-law advisor, but I never met with him in order for him to tell me what to do. So I've been doing everything on my own since I graduated with my master's. Actually, had I known that I could have continued with my bachelor's degree or continue with my law degree after my bachelor's degree, I probably would be done by now, but that's okay. We're gonna start from here and we're gonna keep going. I took my LSAT, my first LSAT I took in November 2017, and I was not happy with my score. A good reason why is because I probably didn't have the proper studying tools to begin with. I just kind of jumped in and was like, oh, it's just like taking the SATs, which is not. For those of you who think that it is, it's not. It's totally different. It is a whole different mental process. So I wasn't happy with my score. So this time I'm studying more vigorously and really looking at the material. I haven't posted this video on my channel, but one of the things that I have done already is printed out my questions from my previous test because it was disclosed, and I basically looked at all the questions that I got wrong and just did little notes on there. And I also started back using Khan Academy, which I personally think is helpful for me because it's helping me break down the questions that I initially missed. One of the things that I struggled with the most was the analytical reasoning section of the test, which I have improved on. So it's getting better, but I kind of want to know what are good studying tips and studying practices for when you're trying to retake the LSAT.
Yeah, totally. Well, thanks so much for all the background, Kels. It's definitely helpful for me and everyone watching to get a sense of where you're at. There are definitely some things that come to mind. First off, you said you weren't using maybe the best materials before. Were you using some books that maybe didn't use real LSAT questions?
I didn't use any books, to be honest with you. The first time I used it, I used Khan Academy, and I just went straight into the practice. I didn't look at the lessons or anything. I just went straight into the practice, which I've learned from because now I'm looking at the lessons, and even though it's not really interactive, like you're not interacting with a person, it's a recording that you're watching, I am still learning better than what I learned when I just jumped into the practice test. The part that I'm still struggling with now is probably my logical reasoning section, mainly because I'm not sure how to connect the stimulus to the questions and then find the answer that they want you to answer. Because a lot of times I'll answer it based off of what I think the correct answer is, and it'll be a totally different answer.
Right. So it's really important to build the foundation first. So I'm glad that you're doing the lessons and going over the fundamentals before you burn through practice material. It's really important because there are only so many released exams, and obviously there's nearly 100 released overall, 86 of which are numbered, but the recent exams in particular are the most valuable. And Khan Academy is using some recent stuff from the 50s and 60s and on. So they've mixed that in there. You want to note carefully which exams they are pulling from for practice questions so that you're not doing those later under timed conditions, because your score would be influenced by having seen the questions before, of course.
Right. Okay.
Now, you talked about analytical reasoning, aka logic games, and then logical reasoning as two areas to start with. So I'll give a brief tip on each of those, and then we can go into more depth. Okay. Logic games, analytical reasoning, redoing games is enormously valuable, especially. So if you're using PDFs or you can photocopy your book, I would make multiple copies of the games clean, so that you can do and redo the games again and again to help yourself notice patterns. And then you could potentially watch explanations from Khan Academy or others. I have a bunch of logic games explanations on my YouTube channel as well for most of the games. And it's useful to see how different people break them down. But you also don't want to copy it too much, because at the end of the day, you're the one taking the test. You've got to find a methodology and diagramming style that works for you. And especially with some of the newer exams, you see a lot of curveball games that don't neatly fit into a category. So you do want to be able to adapt a bit. Have you ever redid games multiple times?
I have. With the Khan Academy, I've noticed that they repeat their questions. So I'm getting better at understanding how I got to the answers that I got to. And then the ones that I don't know, I'll just get it wrong and then look at the answer to see how they got that answer. So for next time, I can figure it out on my own. So that's been very helpful. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's great. And one other thing you want to think about is reviewing, and this applies to all sections, reviewing not only the ones you get wrong, but anywhere you have difficulty. And anywhere you're down to 2. A lot of times students are down to 2 and they say, I always pick the wrong one. And I say, yeah, I know it seems that way, right? But what's really happening is you're maybe half the time you're picking the right one when you're down to 2, but you got lucky.
Yeah.
And so you won't necessarily get that lucky again. And so in my book, it's still worth reviewing those and reviewing everything about those questions you had difficulty with or got wrong, whether it was the stimulus or maybe the inferences of the game, the rules there, or was it something in the answer choices. Like for logical reasoning, a lot of times there's traps of encouragement towards wrong answer choices that distract you, and then traps of discouragement away from right answer choices. And so you want to figure out the patterns in your mistakes.
Great. Yeah, that's great information, because I've really improved on my analytical reasoning so well. I took the copy of the test that I took from my previous LSAT and redid the questions that I got wrong. I did 14 questions, and out of the 14 questions, I got 12 correct. So I was like, yes.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great.
I made progress, and it feels so good when you do that, because when I first started studying the logic games, oh my gosh, I was just watching the material and I was just like, what is this?
Totally like a foreign language, right?
Foreign. And a lot of people are like, well, if you're a philosophy major, it makes a whole lot more sense. And I'm like, yeah, I get that, but I'm not. So how do I make it for me? Because in journalism, we're taught to read the material totally differently from how you would read the material if you were a philosophy major. So I have to reset my interpretation style, basically, from what I've learned in college to match what I'm trying to learn from the critical thinking aspect with the LSAT. So in that regard, what tips and tricks would you recommend for people who are studying for the LSAT and are trying to figure out these sections?
Yeah, sure. Well, we talked about games and reasoning a little bit. To go into, we didn't talk about reading comp though, so we could go there a little bit. You talked about reading styles and journalism versus philosophy. Yeah, it's very different. And it's funny, philosophy majors actually are the ones who do the best on the LSAT. And I don't know if it's because they learned something in philosophy or they're just that kind of person, but I mean, most people, I was a political science major, you did journalism, that's way more common. And yeah, you're taught to read more for content, like throughout your life. And so LSAT reading comp is very different from like SAT reading comp, where they're looking for things like tone and the details. LSAT reading comp is very different. So there, you're reading for structure, how the author of the passage goes about making their argument, and what their overall viewpoint or opinion is. A lot of students get bogged down in all the details, especially the nitty gritty when it's something technical like science, and then you just like throw up your hands and you're like, I'm done with this, right? Like it's too much. But so what you want to do is you want to actually not even try to get all those nitty gritty details down, because you're not going to remember them anyway. Focus on walking away with the main idea. They actually usually have a question about the main idea or the primary purpose. And that's kind of like your orientation question in logic games. So that's your warm-up, that's your gimme. If you don't know that, you don't know anything. And that's okay, like you can learn it, but you've got to get that down first. And so walk away, reading comp, have the main idea, tackle all your general oriented questions first, like primary purpose, passage organization, best tone, best title, then the tougher stuff like line reference questions, and then the more inferential questions that require reading between the lines. So the order of approach actually helps you build your understanding as you go. That's true for reading comp, and that can also be true for games. For games, I would do it slightly differently, where I would do the orientation question first, then the local if questions, and then finally the global questions. Because the if questions let you draw some hypotheticals, get you warmed up, give you some prior examples to look at later, when you want to solve a general must be true as well. So my biggest tips actually, aside from just understanding and analyzing specific questions, that relate a lot to the order of attack, working on your pacing, and then ultimately your endurance. Have you played around with that at all?
I have. I take a practice test every weekend. And when I do my practice tests, they're timed, but they're more so to see how long it takes me to figure out certain problems. When I do the actual practice test, I'll go through the whole, all 5 sections, including the one that's not counted, and that's building my endurance. So I'm really good at finishing early, but I need to start going back to check my answers, because I'll finish and I'm like, okay, I'm done, submit, because I don't want to be distracted by, well, maybe I didn't select the right answer. So I'm trying to do that more strategically now, going back to check my answers to make sure they're 100% correct.
Oh, that's good to hear. With regard to timing, like how fast are you finishing a given section?
Anywhere between 3 to 5 minutes.
Oh, awesome. So you have 3 to 5 minutes remaining at the end.
Yeah.
That's an awesome position to be in. That's great. Now, we talked, it is, and that means you have time to go back. And I talked about order of approach for games and reading comp, but the 3 to 5 minutes is actually most valuable for logical reasoning, because you don't have to reorient yourself or refamiliarize yourself with an entire game or passage. They're bite-sized, right? Yeah. So what I recommend doing is, as you go through an LR section, you could flag or mark off 3 to 5 questions that you don't want to deal with in the moment. These are the toughest ones. So if it's a lengthy parallel reasoning question that takes up half the page, or a super technical, sciencey, or abstract language question, like where you just know that you're investing minute after minute, nothing's clicking. A lot of students will get stuck in this kind of LSAT quicksand, where they just invest minute after minute, hoping to get a breakthrough, but nothing happens. It's like you're almost stuck in like a tunnel vision. And so if you skip that question and say, you know what, I don't want to get sucked in, I'll hope to come back to it later. If your pacing is on track, you'll have that 3 to 5 minutes to go back and attack those questions, and you'll have a fresh perspective, maybe see it a new way, and you'll be able to turn it from wrong to right, or from a guess to right. And I myself, I got a 175. I still do this. I'll still flag 3 to 5 questions, and that's okay.
Yeah.
It makes all the difference to have a new perspective later, and at least you got to the ones later in the section that might have been easier for you.
Great. Okay. I'll definitely start doing that. With the LSAT test itself, when you're preparing up to the day to take the test, what are some recommendations that you would make for people who are preparing the week before or the week of their exam?
Yeah, totally. Well, at this point, I would definitely want you to have completed at least 10 timed practice tests.
Okay.
And you said you were doing 5 sections, which is great. And anyone out there who's doing out of the books, what you could do is, let's say you have exams 82, 83, 84, and 85. You could take exam 86, divide it into 4 parts, and insert each of those 4 parts into those other 4 from 82 to 85, then later score your results for 86. So at least that way you're taking the experimental seriously.
Okay.
So that's one thing you could do. I'd also talk about really strictly timing yourself. So if you're doing it at home or in the library, you might, and you're just proctoring yourself, and you might have the impulse to check your results after each section, or check your phone intermittently, or get a drink of water and stop the clock. None of that can happen on test day. You're not going to have your phone with you on test day, and the clock does not stop. So time yourself very strictly. It's all real. It's all on the clock. And let's say you're having some sort of snack before the exam, or during the break. Simulate that in the weeks leading up. So maybe you have a banana or a granola bar or an energy drink or something. Practice with those, especially if you're practicing with Red Bull or coffee. The caffeine will have an effect on you, right? So do that now so that you're used to it. And of course, coffee is also a diuretic. So if it makes you have to go to the bathroom or something, you don't want that to happen in the middle of section 2, right? The break's a long ways away. So plan accordingly and simulate everything you possibly can. Have you ever taken an exam in a setting that has a little bit of distractions, like a library or a coffee shop?
Yeah. My LSAT that I took last year, we actually took it in a location where they were having homecoming. So they had the homecoming parade going on. That was one. And then they had a train go by the entire time we were taking the test. So distractions were there.
Well, I'm glad you shared that, because people never believe me. They're like, could there really be such an awful distraction during the test?
Yes.
Yeah, there's marching bands. There's a game going on the field right outside your test center. Things happen, or even the fire alarm could go off.
Yes.
It's crazy. It's unfortunate.
It's real.
Yeah,
it's
real. It's real. Yeah, so all you can really do is prepare for, hope for the best, prepare for the worst, that sort of thing.
Right.
And also try to take the exam before you actually need to. So let's say you're planning on the June or July LSAT. That's good because you still have the fall. Like let's say you're planning to this fall, you still at least have September. But if you wait till September, then you're pushing it back even further, and that's okay. But you want to be prepared for anything and have the opportunity to retake if you need to, and not have it affect your timeline.
That you mentioned that, yeah, because another question that I want to ask in regard to that is, what would be the best time to take your test, especially considering, and we could probably talk about this later, the digital LSAT that's coming out in July. We only have March, June. I think, March and June are the only 2 tests that we have left that are going to be paper. And then in July, they're going to start the digital. So with people who are looking to go to law school now, when would you recommend to be a good time for them to take their test?
Yeah, that's a great question, Kels. It's something I've been trying to inform as many people as possible about, because it is big changes. Like 2019 is a huge year of transition for LSAC. So March and June are your last chances to do paper and pencil. I recommend going for one of those test dates if you can, because the digital format, they haven't worked out all the kinks. It's kind of clunky. I've heard stories from test takers and other tutors who actually found like their thing was crashing during the test. Like the app was crashing. That's obviously a big disaster if it's you, right?
Yeah.
The clock does not stop. Or if even if they adjust, it's still a mess, of course. You can't draw freehand on the tablet. So if you're used to like writing on the page and drawing brackets around things and the stimulus for a logical reasoning question or diagramming games on the page, that's going to change. Going with the digital, you'll get scrap paper, but of course it's not really the same thing. Then you're looking between them. There's also another thing about the digital format I don't like, which is that there's a countdown clock. And I don't know if you ever go on those sketchy websites where they try to get you to impulse buy, like the clock's losing chance, right? You
have this much time left.
Yeah, buy now, exactly. So the digital LSAT has that too. And you can remove the countdown clock, but only until the 5-minute warning. Once the 5-minute warning hits, you cannot get rid of that clock. And so I can imagine the adrenaline, like the heart pounding, and it's like, oh my God, time's running out. And it's also distracting to have that motion. So I'd say if you can avoid the digital format, try to get it done by March or June. What happens in July is half of test takers will get assigned the digital format, half will be assigned the paper and pencil format, but LSAC chooses for you, and you don't get any advance notice. Right. I think that's awful. They're calling it a best practice for like their own internal statistics, but that's not good for the test takers.
Right.
So I would say avoid July if you can. One cool thing about July is that they'll let you see your score before canceling as a one-time freebie, and kind of as a consolation prize for having to go through that ordeal. But at least September, you're getting digital, so at least it removes some ambiguity. But again, try to get it done before July. If not, it won't be the end of the world. I'd say in general, you want to apply earlier rather than later in an admission cycle. But law school admissions is rolling. So if you apply even in November or December, that's not really late. Even law schools are taking people with January or March scores, even for that cycle to start less than a year later. So the cycle has even spread out a lot. The benefit of applying earlier is that you have a slight advantage, and there's also more scholarship money available.
Gotcha. Okay, good to know. And I have taken a look at your blog and saw some of the resources that you offer with your LSAT study tips and your LSAT prep. What are some things that you can tell my viewers that you offer on your website so that they can check you out? Yeah,
sure. So a couple of things I'll highlight. There's a ton there. I've been doing this blog for over 10 years now. So there's like over 1,000 articles on every aspect of LSAT prep. A couple of things I'll highlight are the LSAT study schedules. Those are like the #1 most popular thing on my site. I have free week-by-week plans and then low-cost day-by-day plans to tell you exactly what to do over the course of your prep. So that involves which of the various articles to read on my site, which LSAC resources to use, like which prep test problems to complete, and then which other pages and various other prep books to consider using as well to supplement. So those have been enormously popular. I've got study plans for a period of 1 month, all the way up to 7 months. I'd recommend studying for at least 3 to 5 months to maximize your potential, but if your timeline's shorter than that, I've got you covered on that too. Another thing I'll highlight is the LSAT Diaries. You know, a lot of times you're studying for the exam. It's hard when you feel like you're going through it alone. And that's part of why like YouTube channels like yours are so useful, because then people can see you're not that, you know, I'm not the only one. There's other people out there too having their own struggles and their own journeys. And so what I've done is I have LSAT Diaries. I've had a number of students writing over the years, probably at this point, a couple hundred people have written their own guest posts chronicling their LSAT study journeys, and you can actually see their score improvements. So I have people going from like a 141 to a 168, a 150 to a 170, a 160 to a 170. So wherever you're at, you can see people who have made big or moderate score increases, but these are all real stories. And so it's also good to get some tips from other students as well. And so that's one thing I want to really highlight. If you just Google LSAT Blog Diaries, you'll find it. And also like LSAT Blog day-by-day study plans, but I could also send you the links as well.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. That's awesome. I love looking at people's progress. There are not that many, because I've been looking, there are not that many YouTube videos about people starting off with low scores and then them progressing. They're usually just like, bam, I scored a 180, or wow, look at me score a 165. And you don't see the transition from not necessarily bad, but the transition from a not so good score to an average to a really good score. And I think it's important to see people's progress so that you know that you aren't alone in your LSAT study process. I think that it's great that you have diaries for other people to view. That's amazing.
Thanks, Kels. No, I really appreciate it. I think it's important to know that it's possible to improve like this, because a lot of people don't want to share their low scores because they're embarrassed. You get this like selection bias where people on forums and stuff, like you only see people who are getting like 160s and 170s. And it's like, well, yeah, the median is a 151. So these people are out there. They're kind of lurking and afraid to voice their opinions because they'll be embarrassed. And I get that. I mean, for a long time, I was embarrassed to admit that I started off with a low score. I started off in the low 150s. And it was only through a long struggle of studying for over a year that I was able to get my 175. And I did every exam ever released up to that point. So it was grueling, and I felt dumb for a lot of it, honestly. This exam is great at making people feel stupid, but it is possible to improve. It's a bit of a slog sometimes, and you just got to have faith that by continuing to put in the work and reviewing in depth, you'll make those improvements over time.
Yeah, that's encouraging. Thank you for that. That's really encouraging. So you said that I could ask some questions in regards to admissions. So let's say you get the score that you want and you're ready to apply for law school. For someone who's never done it before, what do you recommend are the best steps to applying to the law school?
Yeah, sure. Well, one of the biggest things I would say is request your letters of recommendation early. You know, it takes time. People are busy. Maybe there's a professor you had in college a couple of years back, and you got to remind them who you are, and it's actually good to stay in touch with these people over time, maybe even just once or twice a year, to stay on their radar, ping them on social media every now and then. But then you request those letters early so that they're not holding you back when you're ready to apply. You know, maybe a couple professors, maybe a previous employer, or someone you interned under, someone like that. Get the ball rolling on those. You could even supply them with a couple of bullet points. So like if you wrote a term paper or a project you did at work, just so they can include that in the letter, make it a little easier for them. Occasionally, they'll even ask you to draft one for them. That's not uncommon. And so that's something to work on too and start thinking about. The best writing takes time. And that applies also, of course, to your personal statement or diversity statement or why our school statement. And so all of those, you want to be drafting early. And even if you don't, there's a 3-week gap while you're waiting for your LSAT score. You take it, let's say you're taking it June 3rd, you'll probably get your score back end of June. And so over that 3-week period, you could work on your personal statement and whatnot. And then you're ready to hit submit the second applications open in the fall. So I'd recommend starting early, multiple drafts, even put it away for a week or two or a month or two, come back later. You won't be as emotionally invested in what you wrote before. In fact, maybe you'll think it sucks, and that's fine. You can scrap the whole thing and start over. It's fine. But at least it gives you a fresh perspective to be a little bit more critical. And then, of course, you want to enlist a number of people, friends and family, colleagues to review it also, because they can be more critical than you are.
Gotcha. Makes sense. With the personal statement, what tips would you recommend for someone who's starting to write theirs as well?
Well, first off, be personal. Don't laundry list your resume. Maybe consider a couple of anecdotes or highlights from your work experience, internships, undergrad, or if you were in grad school, anything. Maybe pick 3 topics that you might consider writing about and write 500 words or 1,000 words on each. and then see which you like the best and go forward with that. And ultimately, I recommend writing a rough draft that's 3 times the length of what you want your finished product to be. And then you can cut it down. People are overly detailed, too much flowery language, too many prepositional phrases and whatnot. And good writing is succinct. There's a famous quote: "If I had more time, I would have made it shorter," because it takes time to cut it down rather than just being overly wordy. So maybe write 2,000 words, and then over time chop it down to no more than ideally 2 pages double spaced.
Gotcha. Okay. So as a whole, what advice would you give to people who are in the application process of their law school journey?
Yeah, I would say that the biggest thing is you're more than your LSAT score. It's just a number. It doesn't define you. And there's actually a margin of error of like 7 points. 7-point range means that like you could go 3.5 points on either end, but still the range. So even if you got a 160 and you think, oh my God, I was scoring 163 before, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong. You just had a bad day, or it was random about the nature of the exam itself. But either way, it does not define you, and you can improve. I got a 152 when I started. That's like a median score, but my abilities are not median or average, right? I brought it up. I improved through familiarity. And so if you're just starting off and you take a cold diagnostic and you don't do as well as you'd hoped, that's okay. You can improve. And no one LSAT test date will make or break you. You can retake. Law schools don't average multiple scores. And so if you're taking the LSAT, you're registered for March, June, July, whatever, it's not the end of the world if that test date doesn't go well, because you can always retake. And even if not, the law school you go to won't make or break your entire career. You can progress, you can achieve great things no matter where you go. So much of career success is not even about which law school you went to or what you learn in law school. It's about your networking and connection. So if you're more of a people person than a bookworm, like that's fine. You'll be fine in the end.
That is really great information. Thank you so much, Steve. Do you have any closing remarks? Those are the end of my questions. Or if you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them as well.
Nothing in particular. I think we covered the basics, Kels, but it's been great connecting with you today. I hope you found this helpful. And anyone on your channel, please feel free to come on over. I'm on youtube.com/LSAT Blog. There's the podcast, LSAT Unplugged. And if you email me with a screenshot of your subscription to either, I'll send you a free LSAT checklist. And if you go on my website, LSAT Blog, there's a link to get a free, easy LSAT cheat sheet. I'll email it to you. So again, thanks for connecting. And anyone, please feel free to reach out if you need anything at all. Email me, lsatunplugged@gmail.com. I love hearing from students. Happy to help however I can.
Yes, I absolutely love this, Steve. Thank you so much for reaching out to me. You guys, make sure that you follow Steve on all of his social media, especially follow his blog because he has some really helpful information on there. I was on there all this morning. It's really, really great material. And his YouTube tips are excellent, excellent, excellent as well. I cannot sing his praises enough. And I'm not just saying that because we're doing a collaborate. I actually studied his material and it is great. So you guys, please check him out. If you're not following me on my Instagram, everything is KelsTells. So be sure to follow me. If you guys have any questions, you already know what to do. Put them in the comments below. Give this video a thumbs up and we'll see you guys next time. Thank you guys so much for watching. Bye.